How are you? I'm well. Today I want to test some Absorbent Ground. This one is by Golden. It looks very interesting. Last week I tried watercolor, a mixed media painting, watercolor on this wood canvas. If you want to know how I did it, I'll link the video at the end if you're curious. Today, in the same vein, I want to try this Absorbent Ground and do a similar type of painting using watercolor and maybe a bit of acrylic. This is basically some kind of gesso-like primer that you put on a canvas or something with like a surface with tooth, where once it's dried, it'll be kind of like paper absorbent, and it could take super diluted acrylic to create watercolor like effects. It seems very interesting, so I'll try it and I'll be able to compare how I feel about the Absorbent Ground versus this little technique of mounting watercolor paper on a wood panel. Ideally, you'd be using this on a canvas that was pre-gessoed, a surface that has a little bit of tooth and texture so that the Absorbent Ground can hold onto the surface. As a first coat, they suggest not to dilute the ground, although you could put 25% water, but they say to just put a coat and let it dry for 8 hours. And then on the second coat, you dilute it with about 20% water to have a thinner layer on top. And 2 coats is enough to start working. And also to prevent cracking or any problems with the ground, they suggest not to put too thick of a layer, like a regular first layer and then a thinner second layer. I'm gonna be using this canvas board for my test. It's a pretty thick medium. It applies well, but it kind of feels like plaster, a liquidy kind of plaster feeling. I recommend a soft bristle brush so that you don't see too much brush strokes on the different layers you're gonna put on. Maybe a foam brush would be better. And also I would do multiple canvases at once, just because you need 8 hours for a coat to dry. You need 2 coats. So it's a lot of prep work. What I would do is probably prep a whole bunch of canvases to use up the entire jar, because I have a feeling that once opened, it might dry up in the jar if left like for a couple months, you know? So I would rather, if it works well, buy it, use it all up, having a bunch of surfaces ready to go for art instead of doing one at a time and kind of wasting the medium. The canvas is fully dry. I want to give you my first impression. So I'm going to try some acrylics, very diluted, as if I was using it like watercolors. See how porous this surface is. They say it should be paper-like. I'll also use some watercolor and in the same painting to see the differences between acrylics and watercolor. I'll start with watercolor because I'm very curious about this. Put a bit of water up top here. I put a lot of watercolor now. It doesn't feel absorbent, honestly. It feels like it stays at the surface. Like it pulls at the surface. Done now. We also see the streaks of the paintbrush when I put the ground down. It's really tricky to have a flawless surface. It's kind of a coarse streak though. So I guess using a soft brush is really important, but I wonder how much of a smooth surface you can achieve, you know? Also, I shouldn't expect this to work as well as paper, obviously. Let's readjust expectations. I'll see how this dries, like the watercolor at the top. See how much more paint I can put on. I'd like to get it like to be a darker color, and it doesn't seem to want to take more paint. And also there's a hair that got stuck here. Obnoxious. So I'll let this dry, and while it's drying, I'll put a bit of super diluted acrylic paint at the bottom. See how that works. Okay, super diluted. Let's see. This is very diluted. I think that I like the feel of diluted acrylic more than the super thin feel of watercolor. It seems like it covers a little bit better. I'm really using the thinnest possible consistency of acrylic and see how it behaves. It layers pretty well, considering. I'm gonna let this dry, see what happens when I try to add more colors, both on the watercolor side and with acrylics. Everything is dry now. Honestly, I really like the finish of acrylic paint. It actually looks like watercolor, which is really interesting. What I've noticed is that as I was painting, the water kind of stayed at the surface of the canvas and not really sinking in the way it would on paper. But after letting it dry, it did sink in. So I guess maybe it's just like getting used to another way to paint with this. But I'm gonna add some watercolor in the sky. See what happens when I try to layer. See if it takes it. I want to darken the top part of the sky. See, it really like the puddles, it doesn't flow well. I wasn't expecting it to flow super well, but it's kind of hard to control compared to paper. But I don't have a lot of experience with watercolors anyways. So someone with more experience might be able to navigate this a little better than me. You know what, in this corner here, I'm going to add a darker bit and just like let it kind of sink in and see what it does as it dries, see if it really layers well. As I'm moving things around, it's revealing the canvas a lot. So layering works, but controlling the paint is difficult because as you're moving paint on canvas, it kind of removes it, whereas on paper things flow together and kind of really mix. So that's where the challenge here is here with watercolor, at least. I'm gonna work on a little bit more on this and add a little bit of contrast with acrylic. Let's see. It layers very well. I'm liking how acrylic plays here with this. It's very interesting. It feels like acrylic responds better to the ground than watercolor. Although, as I've said, someone more used to watercolor than me could probably do something a lot nicer than me. Just trying here to lift this and create some foliage. It works very well. I think I'm gonna try a little bit of colored pencil. Not that I think it's gonna look better or anything. It's just that I'm curious to see how it would respond and behave. What am I supposed to do with this? I have pastels as well, a little bit of pastel. Why not? I like the feel of it, and I get a pretty decent, sharp line, you know? Interesting. So this is colored pencil. It goes very well. It really holds. The only issue that I'm seeing is that we see the brush stroke of the application of my ground, because you see that grain of the absorbent ground with the brush. I guess if you're better than me at applying and you use a softer bristle, maybe dilute the ground a little bit more, and instead of having a thicker coats, doing more coats that are thinner at a time, so you would have less of a texture maybe. But it doesn't feel like drawing on a canvas at all. It feels kind of like paper, but with a rough texture. I really like the feel of it. With pastel, it works very well, surprisingly. This is very, very workable. That's probably how I would use this ground, actually. I would use it in mixed media. I would likely use super diluted acrylic with something like a charcoal or a pastel, and then add some water to have everything flow and blend. And if I wanted to add finishing touches of like more bold, thick and opaque colors, I could do that with acrylic, like a thick layer of acrylic at the end if I want like something expressive. Yeah, this is pretty cool. And I love expressive portraits and unconventional portraits, and I could see myself having a lot of fun with different mediums and going like wild, doing a portrait in large format using a ground like that, because at the end I'm always a little bit reticent to use a paper and then work super hard at a piece and having to frame it under glass after. I just like it less. That's why I keep trying to find ways to start with either like a framed wood panel as my canvas or my surface, and then find ways to be able to use all kinds of different mediums on it. I like this. Absorbent Ground. I have a feeling that it would work really well with oil pastels also, because it's very matte and it wants to hold on to pigment, so that's really cool. If you try this though, I suggest to have a big session of prepping a bunch of wood panels or canvases or boards like this one and use it all up in one go, just because it might dry up on you in the jar. That's how I would do it. And also it's kind of work to put a layer, waiting for it to dry, another layer, and so on. So I would have like a big session of like a day or two of prepping everything, using up the entire thing, and then having a bunch of canvases ready to go. So that's how I would do it. Here's a portrait that I painted. If you're curious and you want to watch it, hit the bell for notification to make sure that YouTube recommends my channel when I publish. And I will see you in just a few days for another one. Thanks for watching.